Earlier this week, I started on the project of demonstrating how to work with some fondant. In working with store-bought fondant or your own homemade marshmallow fondant, which is what I prefer in the classroom, there's a learning curve to it. It's not like Play-Doh, to where if you get skilled doing what it is you're trying to do, then awesome. Now you can't over knead fondant like you can certain flour type of baked goods because fondant is, you just can't over knead it. But there are some tricks that you need to know. I call that judgment, developing judgment skills, to even be able to buy a kit. Like I purchased this tasty succulent garden cookie kit, and it came with the fondant, and the cookie was already baked inside the package, and there was some royal icing, and you just simply had to assemble. Sounds pretty easy, but there's still some skill that, if you're not used to working with this stuff, could make somewhat of a disappointing experience. And it's those things that I'm going to talk about today. So I've got my iPad set up so that way you can see my work surface more than me. And I'm going to show you some of the things that I've discovered working with this store-bought fondant that came with this kit. Okay, so now I've already opened the fondant. I have about half of the amount that was in the kit right here. And this is the way the fondant comes. It's pretty dry. You can almost see this stuff crumbling as I squeeze it. And if I wanted to make something rolled out like leaves or some of the succulents that I need to make with this kit, this is dry and cracky, and it's not going to make very nice rolled pieces once I am ready to decorate the garden with. So with this, the first thing I need to do is just take this fondant, and I need to warm it up with my hands. And because this happens to be dry, I know it's dry because I've done this stuff with fondant before. This is just dry. I need to work with it a bit, and I need it to be really not so cracky, so that way when I squeeze it, I don't want to see these cracks. So I have a little dish right here. This has some vegetable shortening in it, and if I was working with the marshmallow fondant, especially for beginning users, sometimes you need some of this to stop it from sticking to the counter, and sometimes you need some of this just in general to store it so that way it doesn't dry out. This stuff needs some of this. So to begin with, I'm going to rub this on my hands, and then I'm just going to start working this fondant until I get it to the point that I don't see that it's cracking when I squish it or shape it. And this takes just a little bit of playing with it. Plus, as I do this, it does warm up a little bit, but I did discover with this fondant that came with this kit, it's so dry, even when I get it warm, it still kind of gets this cracky sensation. So, and I'm going to put just a little bit more fondant on here. Now, I don't want to I'll work the little bit of oil into the fondant, but I don't want to add so much that there's a point in time in which it's too much. And that's hard to tell when you've got too much as you're adding this, but as you saw, I put it on my hand just a little bit, and now I'm working this stuff. And I want it to be really soft and pliable, and I'm really breaking this apart, as you can see. Get it into my hands. If you've ever tried to make a snake before, working this. Now, when I tried to do this on Tuesday in the Zoom class, my hands were cold and I was working on a counter. But now I've got what's called a Silpat baking mat here. This is what I usually use at school, or I use parchment paper for students to work on because it makes the surface be less, have a less tendency to stick, or the stuff releases fairly easy versus my wooden counter or a tabletop.
Okay, so still just a bit cracky, and I'm going to add just a little bit more right there on my hand. Rub that in. That should be enough to get me started. Now my kit tells me I'm going to be making a couple of different kinds of succulent plants to decorate my cookie planter box. And the kit came with 3 cutters, and these are just general shapes so that I can get the shape of fondant that I need to be able to work with to make these creations. The instructions aren't real clear about these creations. I just split a little bit of fondant off, and now I'm getting ready to lay this down so I can roll it, because I'm going to cut some of this fondant so that I can begin making the succulent flowers. And I have here what's called a little fondant rolling pin. I was surprised that Dollar General in Burlington had this. It was $3.25, something like that. Okay, so I have a little piece of fondant, and it doesn't stick to my Silpat because that's the nature of what this is. It works that way. If this was parchment, it might stick a little bit, or if my fondant was so extremely sticky that it was sticking all over my rolling pin and everything, I would have a little bit of 50% powdered sugar, 50% cornstarch, and I'd have a little brush that I'd brush this on. I'd dip a little brush into my 50-50 cornstarch, powdered sugar, and I'd brush this on. Usually the brush that I use would be a little bit bigger than this, and that would stop it from being so sticky, so that I could still lift it up and work with it. Okay, so to begin with, here's the leaf cutter that came with my kit, and I'm going to cut out some of these shapes here to make a leafy succulent. Okay, I got this cut out. And sometimes at school, students roll the fondant too thick, and then it gets stuck inside the cutters, which happens a lot with letters. This one's not too bad, but if that ever happens after cutting, I usually try to oil up and not oil it to the point where I see it, but I get a little shortening on my fingers, and then I put it around my cutter. And then if it sticks inside the cutter, I'll take one of my little fondant tools and push it out. And then it comes right out. And if it gets to sticking, then I do have to clean off the leftover fondant that's on the tools. Okay, so now I've got 5 of these little leaf pieces, and I'm going to lay these side by side, and they're actually kind of overlapping a little bit, to be able to make a succulent in which these the skinny parts of this particular shape, where it gets skinny to the top, those are leaves that are going to be folded around. And I've got these in a pile. Move the excess. These are all in a pile. I'm going to press gently. Press, 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 press. Just gently, just so that way as I start rolling these, they won't come apart. And now I'm going to start rolling this. Starting with the first one that I put down. And as I roll, I'm going to pay attention to where the leaves are going. And I'm going to kind of move it side to side a little bit, so that way my third leaf comes in between the first 2. I don't want the leaves to be like right behind each other to where they're all in the same place. I want them to kind of stagger through my rolling process. Okay, so there is I'm going to guess this is like an aloe succulent plant. Okay, and now when my fondant is too dry or not warm enough or not worked enough, I discovered that I started getting cracks really bad, to where my leaves would begin to fall off as I squeezed down here at the bottom to get that into shape. And I did purposely squeeze down here a little bit as I was rolling this, so that way I could control where the leaves went. Okay, so then to finish this off, I'm just going to bend down like an aloe plant a couple of these leaves to look natural. And there it is. And then because this root's so long and I know I have to stick it onto my planter, I'm going to lay that down. I don't have my little knife here, so I'm just going to cut this off just a little bit so that I have a nice flat base. And I want to check to make sure that my succulent plant can stand, and it does. And then I have a small container. Now this did not come with my kit. I actually made this on my own because I've done these before, gingerbread houses, and I know that usually this is needed for various things. So I just made my own royal icing, and I have to keep it covered because this will dry out right away. This has no fat in it, and it dries really hard, and I'm going to show you how it dried onto the planter box to hold the planter box together. So then I'm going to spread a little bit of the royal icing on the bottom of my, I'm going to call it an aloe plant, although there's a lot of different types that are long and leafy like this. I've got a little bit of this right there, and then I'm going to move the camera so that you can see my planter box. And I think that this is going to go, I'm going to put this one right here. And I'm going to, again, move things a bit so that you can see this. I'm going to move my leaves where I want them. Now right now all of these leaves, because I had placed them earlier, they're hard, and if I start touching them they will fall apart. Or they'll break off because they're a little bit crisp and I've let them dry. And leftover fondant like what I have here, if I'm not going to use it right away, it needs to go back into the bag, and I want to keep it away from air, otherwise it won't be workable in a little bit. Okay, so here's my planter box. As you can see, I do this little by little. I put the royal icing on, make sure things stick, and then I give it some drying time. And then you can see I did have a crack in the cookie. I did fix that with royal icing, and now I'm using leaves to cover that up. I don't know that I'll go all the way to the bottom, and I do have some brown icing that I'll use to decorate a little bit on this, the outside of this planter box. And I will show a video shortly of how to put the royal icing on to make it look like dirt in my planter box. And I'm going to pick this up so you can see all the various sides. These are some that I've made already, and the one that I just demonstrated was the leafy one that looks like the aloe plant right there. And there are some ones that are more round and rolled, and I'm going to show you that one next. So, and I try to keep all the different succulents in this, different sizes, because that's what the picture showed. There's not real good instructions with this kit, but once so I have to use, I'm going by their model, but I'm going by what looks good to me in these different sizes as I assemble where the greens are going. And this one right here is the one that I just added to with the royal icing there. And it just fell over, so now I have to pick it back up so it'll stand up, and then I've got to let it dry.